Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. We want to welcome our friends in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I'm pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today's topic is titled The Palestinians Holocaust. Now, I want to begin today's broadcast by taking a brief but very important deep dive into the European Holocaust. We've often seen in the historical cycles of time that past is prologue. As a wise man once said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. With that said, I'm going to share some information from a well-documented presentation you can find online titled The Holocaust by the editors of history.com. I'm going to just be sharing a portion of it, so we're going to provide a link for those of you who would like to visit the website and just spend some time reading the entire document, looking at the photos, and I believe there are also some videos. The Holocaust was the state-sponsored persecution and mass murder of millions of European Jews, Romani people, the intellectually disabled, political dissidents, and homosexuals by the German Nazi regime between 1933 and 1945. So first off, the Holocaust, the European Holocaust, was not just about the extermination of Jews. There were many different groups of people that were targeted, but the largest number of a single identifying source were Jews. Now, the word Holocaust comes from the Greek words holos, meaning whole, and kostos, or burned. This was historically used to describe a sacrificial offering burned on an altar. After years of Nazi rule in Germany, dictator Adolf Hitler's final solution, now known as the Holocaust, came to fruition during World War II, with mass killing centers in concentration camps. About 6 million Jews and some 5 million others targeted for racial, political, ideological, and behavioral reasons died in the Holocaust. More than 1 million of those who perished were children. Anti-Semitism in Europe did not begin with Adolf Hitler, though use of the term itself dates only to the 1870s. There is evidence of hostility towards Jews long before the Holocaust, even as far back as the ancient world, when Roman authorities destroyed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and forced Jews to leave Palestine. Not Israel, forced Jews to leave Palestine. I want to emphasize that point. Now, the Enlightenment during the 17th and 18th centuries emphasized religious tolerance, and in the 19th century, Napoleon Bonaparte and other European rulers enacted legislation that ended long-standing restrictions on Jews. Anti-Semitic feeling endured, however, in many cases taking on a racial character rather than a religious one. Did you know? Even in the early 21st century, the legacy of the Holocaust endures. Swiss government and banking institutions have in recent years acknowledged their complicity with the Nazis and established funds to aid Holocaust survivors and other victims of human rights abuses, genocide, or other catastrophes. The roots of Adolf Hitler's particularly virulent brand of anti-Semitism are unclear. Born in Austria in 1889, he served in the German army during World War I. Like many anti-Semites in Germany, he blamed the Jews for the country's defeat in 1918. Soon after World War I ended, Hitler joined the National German Workers' Party, which became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, known to English speakers as the Nazis. While imprisoned for treason for his role in the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, Hitler wrote the memoir and propaganda tract Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, in which he predicted a general European war that would result in the, quote, extermination of the Jewish race in Germany, end quote. Hitler was obsessed with the idea of the superiority of the pure German race, which he called Aryan, and with the need for living space for that race to expand. Listen closely, because there are parallels to what we are seeing today. In the decade after he was released from prison, Hitler took advantage of the weaknesses of his rivals to enhance his party's status and rise from obscurity to power. On January 30th, 1933, he was named Chancellor of Germany. After the death of President Paul von Hindenburg in 1934, Hitler anointed himself Führer, becoming Germany's supreme ruler. The twin goals of racial purity and territorial expansion were the core of Hitler's worldview, and from 1933 onward, they would combine to form the driving force behind his foreign and domestic policy. At first, the Nazis reserved their harshest persecution for political opponents, such as communists or social democrats. The first official concentration camp opened in Dachau, near Munich, in March 1933, and many of the first prisoners sent there were communists. Like the network of concentration camps that followed, becoming the killing grounds of the Holocaust, Dachau was under the control of Heinrich Himmler, head of the elite Nazi Guard. I'll use the acronym so I don't butcher the German pronunciation. The acronym is SS, and later he became chief of the German police. By July 1933, German concentration camps, or KZ, as they were known by their acronym, held some 27,000 people in protective custody. Huge Nazi rallies and symbolic acts, such as the public burning of books by Jews, communists, liberals, and foreigners, helped to drive home the desired message of party strength and unity. In 1933, Jews in Germany numbered around 525,000, just 1% of the total German population. During the next 6 years, Nazis undertook an Aryanization of Germany, dismissing non-Aryans from civil service, liquidating Jewish-owned businesses, and stripping Jewish lawyers and doctors of their clients. Under the Nuremberg laws of 1935, anyone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents was considered a Jew, while those with 2 Jewish grandparents were designated half-breeds. Under the Nuremberg laws, Jews became routine targets for stigmatization and persecution. This culminated in what was known in the translation of the German as the Night of Broken Glass in November of 1938, when German synagogues were burned and windows in Jewish homes and shops were smashed. Some 100 Jews were killed and thousands more arrested. From 1933 to 1939, hundreds of thousands of Jews who were able to leave Germany did, while in a constant state of uncertainty and fear. In September of 1939, Germany invaded the western half of Poland, starting World War II. German police soon forced tens of thousands of Polish Jews from their homes and into ghettos, giving their confiscated properties to ethnic Germans, non-Jews, outside Germany, who identified as German. Germans from the Reich or Polish Gentiles. Okay, so here we have properties confiscated and given to those who were German and those who came from outside of Germany, even who were allied with the Nazis. They were able to secure the property of the Jews. It was taken away from them, as we are seeing today in occupied Palestine. And we have been seeing for decades. For decades. It continues, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. Does this sound familiar? The Jewish ghettos in Poland functioned like captive city-states governed by Jewish councils. In addition to widespread unemployment, poverty, and hunger, overpopulation and poor sanitation made the ghettos breeding grounds for disease such as typhus. Meanwhile, beginning in the fall of 1939, Nazi officials selected around 70,000 Germans, institutionalized for mental illness or physical disabilities, to be gassed to death in the so-called euthanasia program. After prominent German religious leaders protested, Hitler put an end to the program in August of 1941, though killings of the disabled continued in secrecy. And by 1945, from some 275,000 deemed handicapped from all over Europe killed. In hindsight, it seemed clear that the euthanasia program functioned as a pilot for the Holocaust. Now, what can we do? This is that's the limit of what I want to share from this history.com piece on the Holocaust. Again, we are going to include the link, and we encourage you to spend some time and read it and view the photos in its entirety. It is truly a lesson to be learned. But this brings us to, what can we do today about this present day Holocaust that's been going on for decades? A lot longer than the Holocaust that took place in Europe. This has been going on for decades. For over 70 years, we have seen the slow, systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing and genocide in occupied Palestine. The first point of reference in terms of things we can do falls under the category of political activism. Make our voices heard. The following release is from earlier this month, is from the Muslim Democratic Caucus of Texas. I want to share the content of this release with you. The title was End Israel's Attacks on Jenin. On July 3rd, 2023, Israeli forces began a military operation in the Palestinian Jenin refugee camp, where 18,000 refugees live in a 1/2 square mile area, one of the most congested areas in the world. Approximately 2,000 Israeli troops took part in the operation, where Israeli forces used military drones and warplanes to strike targets in the Jenin refugee camp early Monday, in the largest incursion of Israeli military aggression in over 20 years. Over 2 days, 12 Palestinians have been killed, including 3 children. 95 Palestinians have been injured, and over 120 have been arrested. We call on Congress to impose the Leahy Law, which prohibits the U.S. Department of State and Department of Defense from providing military assistance to foreign security force units that violate human rights with impunity, against Israel for using American weapons and killing children and abusing Palestinian civilians. We, Texas elected officials, Texas Democratic Party leaders, and grassroots organizations, call on the Biden administration to pressure Israel to stop its attacks on Jenin, including any further attacks against Palestinians and Palestinian land, and to end the military occupation of all Palestinian territories currently under Israeli occupation. Thank you for your attention to this matter. You may contact the organizers of this letter, the Muslim, and signed off by the Muslim Democratic Caucus of Texas, and by contacting, and then they provide a long list of names and numbers that can be points of contact. Now, we can also do, and this also falls under the category of political activism. We can also do what a concerned citizen from Louisiana did. She wrote a letter to her elected representatives. With that being said, let's hear from my friend out of Louisiana, Cassandra. She's a retired school teacher from that southern state. Are you with us, Cassandra? Brother Sadiq, if you can bring her on. Greetings, can you hear me? Cassandra?
Yes, I had connection problems, but now I think
Okay.
I'm back on.
Okay, you're with us now.
Yes.
First of all, I want to say welcome to today's broadcast. You were kind enough to share what for some will be an eye-opening letter, writing exchange with one of your actually with a number of your representatives. You ended up with the exchange with one of them. Could you please share that first letter you wrote with us and with the audience?
Sure. I wrote first to my congressman and also to both of my senators. And I received a reply back from Congressman Graves. So this is the letter. Dear Congressman Graves, and also Senator Kennedy and Senator Cassidy, I wish to express my utter outrage at the unspeakable violence that has been unleashed on the Palestinian city of Jenin. The fact that my country gives billions of dollars of my tax money every year makes you, me, and every other person in Congress who votes for that money complicit in the war crimes Israel has visited upon the entire population. Photos of the destroyed town clearly show that excessive force was used. Hundreds of innocent civilians were forced to flee for their lives. Children were terrorized, and 3 of them were killed. Who will make good the destruction Israel has caused? Who will pay to
Okay, we're having a bit of a connection problem again. The letter reads, who will pay, the passage that she just dropped off on, who will make good the destruction to rebuild the homes and businesses wrecked? Who will compensate for cars and furniture destroyed? Who will pay for rebuilding the infrastructure? Who will bring back the innocent lives taken or help the families devastated by the loss of loved ones? I will tell you who I think should pay. The Israelis should take it out of all the money we shovel at them. But the shame on the US and Europe for enabling Israel's horrible tantrum will never be erased. In 1948, Palestinians comprised over 90% of the population of Palestine. The land is theirs. It was not Great Britain's right to give away via the Balfour Declaration or the Sykes-Picot Treaty. It wasn't even the United Nations' right to give away. It was farmed and occupied by Palestinians. Shame on us, and shame on everyone who votes for more money for Israel. You are complicit in genocide. Now, this was her letter to all 3 of these representatives, 2 senators and 1 U.S. House of Representatives leader. Now, I'm going to share the response of the congressman who responded to her. He wrote the following: thanks for reaching out to me with your thoughts about the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Throughout my time in Congress, I have been a fierce advocate for a strong U.S.-Israeli relationship. And the recent concerning terrorist attacks have highlighted the need for the United States to continue to support Israel as our steadfast ally and partner in defense, energy, human rights, and democracy. SubhanAllah, democracy. Recently, I joined many of my colleagues in Congress in efforts to reaffirm support for Israel and denounce Hamas. We signed a letter to President Biden supporting Israel's right to defend itself and urging the president to engage with our ally to assist in their defense. We co-sponsored House Resolution 396 condemning the attacks from Hamas, affirming Israel's right to defend herself, calling on Hamas for war crimes, and for urging the administration to continue to support and invest in Israel's sovereignty and security. We also co-sponsored House Resolution 394, condemning the terrorism committed by Hamas, affirming the important relationship between the U.S. and Israel, supporting the capital in Jerusalem, and condemning anti-Semitic acts. We voted to appropriate an additional $500 million for Israeli cooperative programs, and we have engaged the State Department, expressing opposition to their efforts to renegotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. We need to prevent giving Iran access to billions in additional resources they could divert to terrorist groups working against stability in the Middle East. Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Houthis, talking about in Yemen, Houthis that have been under tremendous state-sponsored oppression. Houthis and other Iranian proxies challenge U.S. allies and interests in the Middle East. We must continue using all means to stop these terrorist attacks and prevent their captivity to cause conflict throughout the region. I had the honor of visiting Israel with several of my colleagues to discuss a number of initiatives that are unique to our country's partnership. Since declaring independence in 1948, Israel has become one of our closest and most crucial diplomatic partners and is our strongest democratic ally in the Middle East. This dialogue has produced a substantial partnership that helps to combat terrorism, produces an abundance of scientific research, and results in gainful trade for both nations. Following the attacks on September 11, 2001, our country and brave service members put boots on the ground to fight terrorism. Israel has remained, to this day, one of our strongest strategic allies on the front to ensure that Americans and others all across the globe are protected from radical, violent acts targeting innocent people. The United States provides billions of dollars aid and cooperative endeavors to go towards joint military efforts and research. Oh my goodness. And it just goes on and on. I'm not going to waste any more time with the rest of this letter. I would like instead to bring my guest back on, my friend, to share the letter that she wrote in response to this standard form letter, probably drafted by an APEC, an American Israel Public Affairs committee person in his office. What was your response, Cassandra, to this message that kind of turns one's stomach? Are you there? Is Cassandra back with us? Okay. It looks like she is still not with us. So what I'm going to do is, let me see if I can pull up her letter, her final response to this congressional leader. Okay. And let me just say that the congressional leader who wrote this response, or the response came from his office, his name is Garrett Graves. I believe he's a Republican member of Congress from Louisiana. Now, this, again, this politician's shameful response is form. This is what you get from the vast majority of politicians on Capitol Hill when a constituent like Cassandra here writes a letter of concern pertaining to Israel. Now, this is what she had to say in her final response. Dear Congressman Graves, recently, in response to my message to you about Israeli abuses in Jenin, you wrote to me of your strong support of Israel. When I read your reply, I have to confess that I was appalled that not once did you even mention Palestinians or the people of Jenin. Not once did you show the slightest sympathy or human feeling for people who lost their innocent lives, nor their homes, nor their entire community. Do you deny that Palestinians even exist? Do you even care that children were terrified by the Israeli bombardment of their homes, or that maybe innocent children were killed? Earlier today, the Palestinian Global Mental Health Project wrote, quote, in the history of resistance movements, one individual One individual often stands out as emblematic of the injustice endured by an entire people through exposing many levels of oppressive violence. Such is the story of Ahmed Manasseh, now 21 years old and suffering from severe mental illness. He has languished in the Israeli prison system since his arrest at the age of 13, despite a global campaign demanding his release. Currently, Ahmed's situation has become even more desperate. Ahmed was not due for release until 2024, has not been seen by a medical or mental health professional outside the prison service for the past 3 months. He has been moved during this period to Ramla prison, where he continues to be held in solitary confinement. His legal team, his family, and outside medical professionals have been informed by the prison authorities that Ahmed refuses to see anyone. We can thus only speculate about the current state of a youth who has, for the past 3 years, been judged to be at serious risk of suicide and self-harm. All interventions by humanitarian organizations such as Physicians for Human Rights, Doctors Without Borders, and the Red Cross have been refused by the authorities. The family's eldest daughter described the latest terrifying experience. There were a lot of soldiers. Some are outside, some in the house, maybe 7 in the house. I left my mom's room. I came to my room and wore my jacket. They took my phone from my hand, so I won't call or take photos. I wanted to leave outside. I was afraid, but they refused to allow me to leave. So I sat by my 13-year-old brother and sticking to him, fearing they would arrest him. She describes protecting her younger siblings by telling them to stay in their beds and cover themselves, alarmed that the soldiers would shoot her brothers if they betrayed the slightest movement. Her mother was so distressed that she was unable to stand. On this and previous invasions of the family home, the soldiers caused pervasive damage, stole jewelry, and appropriated money and other possessions, including the father's car. The loss of the car has the consequence that the younger children in the home cannot attend school. The soldiers also urinated in bureau drawers. This is the Israel you defend. This is why Palestinians, and indeed people all over the world who know the truth about Israel's brutality and abuse of Palestinians, hate Israel. This is why children in the OPT throw stones, which are the only weapons they have, at Israeli soldiers, even when they know those soldiers will shoot them with live ammunition. Ammunition I think my government pays for. How can you support the continued solitary confinement and torture of Ahmed and the abuse of his family? Palestinians have a right under international law to resist occupation. They are the ones with the right to defend themselves, not the Israelis. who, as the occupying power, have no such right. They have a right to live on the lands they and their families owned and not be forcibly evicted from their homes so that Israeli settlers can take over, as happens all the time. And then she provided a link. They have a right not to have their homes blown up all the time. Someday, you and every human being will have to face God. How will you tell him that you supported the misery Israel causes? Palestinians do exist. They are real. They are human beings, and they and their ancestors have been in Palestine for millennia. In fact, when the Bible says Philistine, that is the linguistically same word as Palestinian. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. This time when you respond, I would like to hear something that wasn't drafted by an Israeli or by AIPAC. I would like to hear what someone who listens to Christians thinks. How could Jesus Christ justify the torture and slow murder of this young man? Would his heart be as hard as Israelis? And what have they done to yours? This was the eloquent letter that was written by this new Facebook friend of mine. I'm actually seeing you, Cassandra. Is that what you wanted?
Oh, well, I don't know. I moved to another part of the house where the Wi-Fi seems to be better. But thank you for reading my letter. You expressed how I felt.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, bless you.
It's still hard to read.
Bless you so much
And
for what you have done. Do you have a closing thought before I share some other information that we've got to get to before this broadcast ends? Do you have a closing thought that you'd like to share with the viewing and listening audience?
Well, this young man, Ahmed Manasra, he was indicted by Israel. I just read the Times of Israel, which is a very Zionist paper, about him and labeled him a terrorist. If you want to read something more balanced, Haaretz is the other big Israeli newspaper, and they usually do a better job. So, follow him. Google his name and follow him. It's emblematic of everything that's happening, which is it's horrible. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Bless you. I know weather, especially this time of year, gets really dangerous in your neck of the woods there in Louisiana. So I may Almighty God, as we refer to the Creator as Allah, may keep you safe and your family safe, your loved ones, and may Allah continue to bless you and others like you to remain close to this very important struggle that has been going on in an occupied and tortured land for much too long. It's been over 7 decades now. So again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right. Now we want to move on to before we move to the next bit of information we want to share on what you can do, things we can do. There's a clip I'd like for us to see, a video clip that that reflects the concern that Cassandra had, that she was speaking to when she wrote these passionate letters to her congressional leaders. Let's see that piece of video, brother. SubhanAllah, you can only imagine what was going through the mind of that father as he's sitting there watching his home being destroyed. When the Israelis, when the Zionists, when the apartheid imposed settlers in occupied Palestine are not destroying homes and businesses and farmland with bombs, they are doing it with these specially made bulldozers. I don't know if they still are, but I know they used to be specially made bulldozers constructed by the American made company Caterpillar. SubhanAllah. So here he is in that scene. In that scene, this patriarch, this father, is sitting watching his home be destroyed, while his little baby, his child, a disabled child, is in a wheelchair. And I can only imagine what's going through his mind. What are we going to do? How are we going to be able to respond or recover from this? It's SubhanAllah, it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. What I'd like for us to do also is go ahead now and let's see that piece of video also of the lawmakers, these European lawmakers. I believe this might be these are Irish parliamentarians, I believe, or they're members of the European Union. I know that from the accent, most, if not all of them, are Irish. Let's hear what they had to say about this monstrous tragedy that's been going on for much too long.
For anybody to seriously suggest now that what's happening in Israel and Palestine is not apartheid is shocking to me. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the apartheid wall in Jerusalem. I was in Ramallah. I travelled to Hebron. I've seen what happened in Hebron, where that city and community are devastated to protect hundreds of settlers, illegal settlers. It's a damning indictment in our country that in the 1980s we led the way confronting the South African apartheid regime, yet today we can't even pass legislation that bans illegal settler goods. These settlements are illegal under international law, yet we do commerce with those who are responsible for that repugnant situation. We can't even do that. We can't even pass that law in this country. We can't recognise the Palestinian state.
History will judge those who sit on the fence, and history will shame those who bury their heads in the sand while the Palestinian people continue to suffer at the hands of an oppressive, brutal, occupying apartheid state that is Israel. Minister, you must act. You cannot afford to sit on your hands and not act. You must call Israel out for the apartheid policies and the apartheid regime in which they use against the Palestinian people.
The Amnesty International report is clear. It's devastating in its clarity. It concludes that Israel perpetrates apartheid. It notes that Israel's civilian administration, its military authorities, its governmental and quasi-governmental institutions are involved in the enforcement of the system of apartheid against Palestinians. It is as frank and as clear as that. It goes on to say that the scale and seriousness of these violations documented in the report make it clear that the international community needs to urgently and drastically change its approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and recognise the full extent of the crimes that Israel perpetrates against the Palestinian people, crimes that they commit, Minister, day and daily.
The report makes for disturbing reading. It outlines how Palestinians are dealt with as an inferior racial group and how Israel oppresses and segregates them. It shows how Israel is putting in place a regime aiming to dominate and oppress Palestinians. It does this through territorial fragmentation, segregation and control, dispossession of land and property, and by the denial of economic and social rights, but also through forcible transfers, administrative detention and torture, unlawful killings, denial of basic human rights and freedoms, and by persecution.
Ireland has a long and proud tradition of support and solidarity with the people of Palestine. While many of the crimes of Israel's apartheid have long been raised in the Dáil, the EU's central involvement in the arms trade to Israel has seldom been raised. EU members have profited well from Israeli apartheid over the years. Since 2012, EU member states have sold arms to Israel to the tune of nearly 700 million per year. Between 2014 and 2018, Germany and Italy alone supplied 35% of Israel's arms imports. EU states make large profits selling deadly arms to states like Israel, states that frequently abuse international law, suppress and murder peaceful protesters.
Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil and Green TD stood up one after the other, saying it was intolerable. The thuggery and the warmongering and the brutality of Putin, you wouldn't stand for it, urgent action had to be taken. But we've got to be much more careful with the Palestinians and their treatment. And I haven't even got time for the briefing I organised this week about the people of Yemen and how Saudi Arabia, the most despotic regime in the world, armed to the teeth by the United States, Britain, France and others, killing 337,000 people in Yemen in the last 5 years, 10,000 children. Any action against the United States for arming them? Or Britain, or France, or Saudi itself? No. No action, no sanctions, no outrage. Words of concern. We'll raise it. We'll raise it. We'll call on them.
So this is one of the things that we can do. We can exert pressure. I mean, it's heartbreaking to even have to use that terminology, exert pressure on those who are supposed to represent us to do the right thing when it comes to issues of this nature, to not allow our nation state, our country, a land that likes to project itself as the land of liberty and justice for all, to allow this land mired in contradictions, to be the leading sponsor, the leading provider, the leading supporter, endorser, defender of an apartheid Zionist state that's committing genocide before the eyes of the world. So exerting pressure on politicians, on the so-called liberals, on the moderates, on the conservatives, on the Democrats, the Republicans, on the independents, anyone that finds themselves in the back pocket of the Zionist lobby in America. We can exert pressure on them to do the right thing or to remove them from office. Here is something else we can do. We can lock arms within our respective social and religious alliances beyond that the political sphere. I'll give you an example. Just last week, I was invited by my good friend Reverend Graylin Hagler to join an audience of good people for a breakfast that was connected to Palestine at one of the churches. It was an interfaith breakfast for Palestine, and it welcomed a Palestinian professor who is here on one of his missions, to generate support for the work that he's doing. He and others connected to him are doing in occupied Palestine in one of the refugee camps. Anyway, the Fellowship of Reconciliation and Faith Strategies were the hosts of this breakfast that took place on Wednesday of this past week. It was a Palestine-focused breakfast at Fellowship Baptist Church in Northwest Washington, D.C. A special note of thanks to anyone and everyone who was part and parcel of organizing this very impressive breakfast that took place. It was both important and impressive. Now, after it ended, I asked Reverend Hagler if he and a number of others, because I got a request at the toward the end of the breakfast. I recited a poem that I had written years ago, back in, I think it was 1982, during the siege on Lebanon, the massacres that took place in Sabra and Shatila. It gave birth to a poem titled "Israel, O Israel," and this was my awakening. This was it was the most important awakening to that crisis for me, and I've been connected to it ever since. Anyway, I recited the poem, and a number of folk who were present at the breakfast asked if I would send them the poem. They wanted the poem. So I told, everyone that had asked for the poem, I assured them that I would get it to them, but I wanted a little something in return. I asked if they would give me some of their personal perspective on that breakfast that took place and the issue surrounding the breakfast. So anyway, I begin with, and we're coming to a close. I'm going to have to go through this very quickly. I asked Reverend Hagler if he would be kind enough to provide me with a summary of that morning's event that I could share with others. He sent me the following statement. He said, "Brother Abu Srawar, the special Palestinian guest of the hour, received our delegation of Black clergy in 2016 in occupied Palestine. And we dedicated a memorial on a playground in the Aida camp to a young Palestinian killed by Israeli snipers and Tamir Rice, killed in Cleveland, Ohio. There was an immediate kinship between us and our struggles. Dr. Abu Shrawer was in the States raising monies for his theater and arts program, and his travels to the DMV offered us the opportunity to share the program and Dr. Abu Shrawer with a larger audience. The audience at the breakfast this morning were preachers from some of the most prominent churches in Washington, D.C., the 19th Street Baptist Church, Zion Baptist Church, the Wednesday Clergy Fellowship, Plymouth United Church of Christ, Fellowship Baptist Church, and Ambassador Black Church were some of the churches represented. But we were more than Christian because our Muslim brothers and Jewish clergy and advocates were at the breakfast as the power of solidarity came through at the breakfast, along with the commonality of the struggle. I must admit, that was a very impressive assembly in that space, and it was a sumptuous breakfast and discourse. I am so thankful that my brother in struggle and friend, Reverend Hagler, reached out to me and invited me to be in attendance. Another attendee of the gathering, Professor Shelley Wong Pitts, sent the following statement. She said, "It was good to meet you. Thank you for sending me your poem. Here is a paragraph about my response to the breakfast this morning and a brief identification. It was so heartening to be gathered in Fellowship Baptist Church to welcome Dr. Abdel Fattah Abu Shrawer and to hear the talk, beautiful resistance in Palestine, quote unquote. I know that I renewed my commitment to speaking out against injustice. As a U.S. citizen, I am ashamed and horrified that the U.S. gives $3.8 billion a year to Israel, more foreign aid to Israel than any other country. This is deeply troubling when the Israeli attacks on Palestinian refugee camps is intensifying. There is a dramatic increase in illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank and a horrific increase in the deaths of Palestinian women, men, and children, the destruction of their homes, schools, hospitals, and places of worship. I am a professor emerita at George Mason University. I was so encouraged today because I was inspired by the power of drama, music, and the arts as a force of resistance in Palestine. I am encouraged that Reverend Dr. Graylin Scott Hagler is organizing a local Washington, D.C. chapter of the Fellowship of Reconciliation to connect efforts for international solidarity for justice in Palestine and to oppose U.S. government funding of Israel. And then she signs off. Shelley Wong, Associate Professor, Faculty of Education, Emerita at George Mason University. I'm going to stop here with the poem that I had the opportunity to share at this prayer breakfast, the poem that was written back in 1982, given birth as a result of the terrible, terrible catastrophe that was visited upon a predominantly Palestinian refugee camp known as Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon. It was a massacre that was overseen by Israeli Defense Forces, quote unquote, at the time led by the late Ariel Sharon. May he burn in hell forever. And Well, anyway, I'll stop there and just share the poem. Oh, I should also note that the massacre was under the protection of the Israelis. It was conducted by the Christian phalangists under the protection and with the support of the Israelis. It was very, very heartbreaking. Anyway, let me share the poem. A nation of people born from injustice, causing great sorrow in all civilized among us. You claim your only concern to be your security, but your true intent is plain enough for everyone to see. There are Jews among you who detest what you do, but their voices are muffled and they seem to be few. You're proud and you're arrogant, malicious and clever. You seem to think world sympathy is going to shield you forever. Oh, but the bed is too short and the covers are too narrow. You said you can't see the handwriting, for your scope is too narrow. Aggressive you've been since the day you were born, from the anguish and misery of lives you have torn. Israel, oh Israel, where will you be when the pages have dried on your history? With that said, we're going to continue this with a part 2 next week. And that part 2 is going to consist of special guests, rabbis, at least one, possibly 2 rabbis from a Orthodox Jewish community, anti-Zionist, known as Neturei Karta International. We're going to have Rabbi Dovid Weiss and quite possibly Rabbi Dovis Feldman with us to talk about their presence at the demonstration that just took place a few days ago when Herzog, the Israeli president, was here to meet with Biden and to be feted at the U.S. Congress. We're going to talk about Neturei Karta's long-standing opposition to this Zionist Israeli project and what that opposition is based upon. These are Torah-believing Jews, practicing Jews. Inshallah ta'ala, they're going to be our guests next week for next Sunday's broadcast. With that said, we close as we normally do with Surah Al-Asr. Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawasaw bil haqq. Wa tawasaw bis sabr. Which means, in the translation of the meaning, by the token of time through the ages, surely humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll see you next week. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum. I think that perhaps my brother had to step away for a moment. So again, since we still are connected, I want to thank my friend from joining me for joining me from Louisiana, and I want to thank Reverend Hagler again for inviting me to that beautiful breakfast. I want to thank all those who were present. I was so surprised by the number of African American clergy who were present at that breakfast. and what many of them had to say. I was encouraged. I was surprised, and I was encouraged by what was said and done. I applaud the Professor Abdel Fattah Abu Shrawer for the work that he is doing. We're going to support it as much as we can and encourage others to do so as well. And we are going to continue to maintain this struggle. This struggle is so very important, not just for our brothers and sisters in occupied Palestine, foremost. And I'm not just referring to the Muslims. I'm talking about the Palestinian brothers and sisters across the board. Our Christian Palestinian brothers and sisters. SubhanAllah, this is where Christianity is, is said to have begun. This is where Prophet Isa alayhi salam, Jesus Christ, this is where he was born and where he did his work. He was a Palestinian Jew. We are going to continue to do as much as we possibly can to beat the drums for change, because it is absolutely necessary. Our own health and welfare as a nation state depends on this. Thomas Jefferson said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect God is just. His justice cannot sleep forever." This is what one of the founding fathers, Jefferson, said. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., another well-known, highly respected Baptist minister, he said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." What goes around comes around. We cannot afford to continue to behave in our foreign policy as a nation state as we do without consequence, without dire consequence. I believe the only thing that has kept this country from being destroyed to date, is the presence of good-hearted people, sincere, truth, and justice-loving people, like the guest that I had on today, who wrote to her congressional leaders. She's not Palestinian. She's not Muslim. She's just a retired school teacher, American born with a conscience. The folks who were at the breakfast last Wednesday, 99% of them were not Muslim, just Christians and a sprinkling of Jews and a little sprinkling of Muslims. Just wanting to show their support, their concern for a people that have been having to endure a modern day Holocaust. And that's what this is. What is happening to our Palestinian brothers and sisters is far worse than what happened in Germany. It is far worse. Because this has been going on for decades. For decades. And Allah says in the Quran, an oppression is worse than outright slaughter. We must be concerned. And as long as we have a representative segment of concerned folk in this country, we have the opportunity for God's grace. I believe this is the only thing that has kept this country from being destroyed up until now. Oh, I just realized something. I got a message from the engineer. He's having internet problems. I have internet problems in the studio. Can someone end the broadcast? Okay, I will end the broadcast now. We have gone 13 minutes over what the normal time frame is. I didn't realize that this was the case. Now I know. Inshallah ta'ala, I will end it on my end, and hopefully it will be ended by another engineer who is not connected to the internet problems. Okay, someone else hopefully will be able to end it. Anyway, thank you for being with us. Inshallah ta'ala, join us next Sunday. Same time, same station. Salam Media out of Johannesburg, South Africa. 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I think it's 8 o'clock South African time. Join us live. Share the broadcast after the fact. May God bless you. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum. Let's see.